Now going to move on to talk about how we grow our food. Please welcome Patrick Holden, who's chair of the Sustainable Food Trust. Patrick.
Thank you very much. I'm a farmer from West Wales, and I've been farming as sustainably as I've been able to for the last 40 years. So the question I'm going to add to this conference, which I think has been incredible and inspirational already, is if the conference is informed by the question, what should I eat? My question to add to it is, how should I farm in such a way that I can produce food which promotes my health and the health of the public? Because it seems to me that these two questions are linked. And as Tim has just been sharing with us, what we've done to our bodies is very much been mirrored in the soil. Now, this idea goes back a long way. I mean, the current manifestation of this is that we were just involved in organizing a conference called The True Cost of American Food in San Francisco about a month ago, where a man called Tyler Norris from Kaiser Permanente, which is the leading health insurance and healthcare company on the West Coast, said that they were facing an unaffordable public health treatment crisis. And he should know, of course, because in America, they're closer to it because it's a market system. The health insurance premiums are going up, and because they run the hospitals as well, they're seeing the cost of treatment. And he attributed much of this to the industrialization of agriculture, particularly in the Central Valley in California, which of course is America's food basket. And he was echoing really an observation which was made many, many years ago by a woman called Lady Balfour, who was the founder of the Soil Association, an organization I used to work for, and Helen Browning and Peter Melchett are here, actually, as well as Joe Lewis, who are representing the Soil Association. And she saw that we were treating the symptoms of disease rather than investigating the causes of health. And if we were to investigate the causes of health, we needed to go back to farming practice. And she said, in a way, that we've got a national disease treatment service rather than a national health service, and we need to switch that. So she spent her life looking at investigating the causes of health in farming, and she in turn was inspired by a man called Sir Albert Howard, who was sent out to India at the height of the empire a century ago to teach the Indians how to adopt Western diets. And he had the humility to realize that he had nothing to teach them, because he noticed that the sound nutrition of the Northwest Indian populations was due not just to what they eat, but to the way in which it was produced on healthy soils where they were intuitively, without the science, building the soil microbiome. And so really, I think my question is, how much does current farming practice influence, or should it influence, or do we need to change it in order to restore depleted public health? To understand that, I think you need to sort of go back 60 years and say what has happened in post-war agriculture and farming. And I would say, in summary, it is this: that we've embarked upon a 60 or 70-year chapter of artificially stimulating the growth of plants and animals. And we've done that in the case of plants with chemical fertilizers, and the case of animals with high-protein feeds. And when we do that, we inevitably run into the diseases which, as Howard said, are nature's professors of good husbandry, because they reveal to us our management deficiencies, in this case our nutrition deficiencies. And the result is that we have fungus problems, pest problems, and weed problems in plants. So we suppress them with fungicides, herbicides and pesticides. And in the case of livestock, if you feed livestock high-protein feeds, it interferes with their microbiome, and so we've suppressed that. Sorry, how do I stop this running through? We've suppressed that with a whole range of antibiotics, and now we're facing an antimicrobial crisis. So the consequences of 60 years of that kind of practice is that we have a depleted soil microbiome, as Tim and others have said. We have a massively dead soil, really, which needs to be reinstated by changes in farming practice. We need we've got carbon levels at critical levels, and the organic matter content of the soil is the carrier for the biological population that we need to reinstate. And we've got pesticides impacting on public health and almost certainly leading to endocrine disruption on a considerable scale. And the slide there relates to antibiotic use in the UK, which is far higher than many other European countries. And again, as has just been said, 80% of the antibiotics used in the US go to livestock, and it's about 50% in this country. So we really have huge problems there. And in parallel with that, we've had a dramatic narrowing of the gene pool, both in agriculture and in the depleted biodiversity which coexists with agriculture. Lastly, we have a dishonest pricing system where the true costs of the damage to public health and to the environment of our present industrialized food system are not reflected in the price of food in the shops, which means that we're sending very confused signals to consumers. The cheapest food is probably doing you most damage, and the most expensive and more sustainable food is costing more. And that's because the so-called externalities, the damaging consequences to public health or the environment, are not put on the price of the food. Farmers are getting conflicting signals as well. So the best business case is to produce food in an intensive way. The worst business case is to produce food in a sustainable way. And so the system is perpetuated. So the question is, what can we do? And I believe that if we can bring together public health and farming out of our silos and think about a systemic problem in which farming has played a major role without meaning to and contributing to the problems we're discussing today, and we find a way of linking the two sectors together, we can make big structural changes to agriculture. We need to move away from chemistry to biology in the way that we farm, and we need to adopt rotational practices to rebuild the depleted soil fertility. This will be the biggest structural change in agriculture for more than half a century, and it will have huge implications for what we can produce, because if we return to mixed farming, because that's the only way we can rebuild soil fertility and produce enough to feed our arable crops, if we give up nitrogen fertilizer, which has been one of the principal reasons why the soil biology has diminished, along with the pesticides, which, as I said, go hand in hand with those, we will have structural changes in what the farming systems of this country produce. And we need to, I would suggest to you, think about relating the diets of the 21st century to the productive capacity of the farming systems that we need to move to if we're going to restore the vitality and the diversity of our farming systems. So I want to discuss with you briefly what that would mean. And I don't think it's really at odds with what's been said earlier about what we should eat, but I think it adds another dimension to it. So, for instance, if we did that, what would happen in this country? Because I want to argue that the diets that are going to maintain public health ought to the maximum degree which is feasible, source our staple foods from the production systems that we can switch to in this country. Because at the moment we have a globalized food economy, and surely we should make it at least a little bit more localized within the constraints of our population and our productive capacity of our agriculture. So in terms of our staple foods, what would a sustainable farming system look like if it was adopted widely in the UK? Well, it would mean that we would have to give up intensively produced chicken and pork altogether, because there would be a net reduction in our grain production, because we couldn't just go on growing arable crops year after year, which we do at the moment in the eastern and more so-called fertile soils, which, as I mentioned, have been diminished by the industrial farming. So this would mean that we would produce less cereals, probably half as many cereals in a reformed agricultural structure. But during the fertility building phase, which would be probably cellulose-based and grass and clover, we'd need livestock, controversially ruminant livestock, producing, yes, red meat, grass-fed of course, to digest the cellulose, manure it, reinstate the lost biology of the soil, and to give the farmers some income, we need to eat that red meat. So I'm suggesting to you that a sustainable diet should be no more cheap industrial chicken whatsoever, no more cheap industrial pork, expensive grass-fed and partly grain-fed chicken and pork, because they can get some of their diet from grass, but probably no more than 30% because they're monogastrics, they don't have a rumen. Whereas in the case of red meat and dairy products, I'm a dairy farmer, I declare my interest, there will be a need, and I think a justifiable need, to eat red meat and grass-fed red meat and mainly grass-fed dairy products. We do feed some grain to our dairy cows, and most dairy farmers in this country will probably have to continue to do that. Then, of course, we will have salads, but not from supermarkets, because unless you buy organic salads, the salads in supermarkets are universally from hydroponics now. So they're no longer soil-fed salads. That's the lettuce, the cucumbers, the tomatoes. All the salads you buy in the supermarkets are not grass-fed, they're soil-fed, they're tube-fed, effectively. And hydroponic production, as we've heard from Tim, is not part of the solution. We need vegetables, we need some grain. We can eat the grain instead of feeding it to the intensive livestock, will still be enough. And we need all the diversity within the constraints of the productive capacity of the system that has been described already in this conference. But we do need to link our diets with the productive capacity of the sustainable food system. We need to avoid processed foods on the whole, and we need to move towards more fermented products such as sourdough bread and that sort of thing, and of course lots of cheese. I'm a cheese producer. So we need to enable those changes. We need a massive education program, and it's no good just saying, I suggest to you, what should I eat, without linking it to the question of how can we farm to produce health-promoting food from the farming systems, which will be aligned to our new knowledge, the extraordinary new knowledge of the microbiome of the stomach, but also of the soil, which is the stomach of the plants that we grow as farmers. There is an exact analogy between the microbiome of the stomach and the microbiome of the soil. 60 years of intensive farming have decreased the microbiome of the soil to incredible levels, and now we've got to restore it, and that means we have to change the way we farm. Now, if we do all that, we will need an enabling policy and economic environment. And talking of externalities, if we could find a reliable means of assessing the negative health outcomes of our present farming systems and monetize it, we would create a very strong case for the government to introduce incentives to switch to the more sustainable farming systems that I've been advocated. That is not current government policy, probably in part because the long-term health, the health outcomes are going to be long-term, not very short-term, so it's not within the political cycle. So these changes can only happen with a huge rise of awareness that the question of what I eat must be linked to the future question of how we farm. Thank you very much.